first, the easiest animation we're going to do is animating this little icon right here to make this little dot go up and down. All right, so what we want to do, we'll come down here. We're going to reference that class that we applied onto it called circle. I want to make sure that we actually have that applied to the SVG element that needs to be. So where is it? SVG. Okay, so the actual circle, there we go. We have to make sure we put class circle right here. So now for circle, what we say is we're going to add an animation called circle anim. We'll define that as a keyframe in a second. For 1 second, it's going to go on infinitely and alternate reverse, which will make it go back and forth from the way it started. And then, so we're going to save that. Nothing happens yet because we have to define the keyframe animation. So keyframes, circle anim. Inside of here, we're going to say from transform, translate, and this is the part that's a little bit tricky. Notice if we come here and we look at this line, we have translate 262 by 798. We actually want to use this value right here because that's the starting point. And we want to put, the only difference is we want to put pixels at the end and separate them out by comma. I know, a little bit confusing. And then also we're going to put Z index, something high like 5, otherwise we don't get to see it. There we go. And then we're going to copy this and we're going to say 2. And the only value we want to change here is the Y value. This is X, this is Y. So we wanted to change it on the Y axis, and we want to push it down to 830 pixels. We can get rid of this. So if we save it, look at that. And there we go. That's just a visual indicator or catch the attention of the eye that this is the call to action that you should scroll down. All right, so now let's get into the meat and bones of the real animation powered by GSAP, which is the GreenSock animation platform. So I've done whole courses and a lot of tutorials on GreenSock animation platform. Go to Google, type them in, look them up. Very powerful animation. So what we want to do is we're going to get it integrated by using the CDN version, which is just the easy way. It's hosted elsewhere. You could also use NPM or Yarn to install it. If you're kind of confused about what any of that is, don't worry. The way you can find the CDN link for it is just type in GSAP3 CDN. We click on this first link and we copy this one right here. Copy script tag, blah, 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 paste it in. So now GSAP's there. We're also going to use something called the scroll trigger to create scroll activated animations. That's a plugin. So we paste that in as well. I believe you can find that as well. Scroll trigger is right there. All right. So now nothing happens. It's just there. Now we have to write the actual JavaScript. All right. So the first thing we want to do is we want to register the actual plugin right here, scroll trigger, in order for that part to work when we get to that part. So GSAP, register plugin, scroll trigger. All right. Next up, we're going to create a timeline called var timeline equals gsap.timeline. If you've never written any of this stuff or even know what JavaScript is, please learn JavaScript or some just basic JavaScript first, because this is going to confuse the heck out of you. This all this stuff is coming from the GSAP. Let me just show you their site real quick. greensock.com. All right. Ultra high performance professional grade animation for the modern web. Okay. So you can get GSAP now. There's showcase, there's documentation, all of that good stuff. So creating a timeline will allow us to do some cool stuff with time-based, sequence-based animations. So now what we say is, let's say for instance, we want our content to kind of scroll. Which class is content, by the way? If you're ever curious, hit Control-Shift-I to get out your dev tools. We go to elements, and content is where at. If I click this little icon right here, I can hover over areas. This is div class content. All right. So let's say if we want to make div class content like come down and fade in when the browser loads, what we can say is we can have it come from these elements. The first parameter needs to specify the HTML element or class or ID of what you want to animate. The next parameter is everything that you want to start animating. So we can open this up. We can say Y on the Y-axis. We'll have it come down. We'll have it come from -30%. We can also take the opacity and make it 0. So it's going to come from 0. And if I save this, look what happens. How cool is that? Let me refresh. So it fades in because we put opacity 0, and it comes from -30. You can also change 2. Like if you go to 2, it's going to go to these values. So it's going to reverse. See? But that wouldn't make sense, would it? All right. Now we can also do some other stuff. There's a lot of other parameters we can use, like duration. By default, I think it's like 1 second. So let's just change this to 2. Oh, that's pretty cool. All right. We can change the easing as well. So if I go to GSAP easings, we go to the documentation section, they have a nice little tool. So it's going to show you all the different easings. So like if you want something crazy, like or elastic, we can apply these values, and they give you the values right down here. So the one that I'm going to use for this is called ease power 4 ease out right here. It kind of starts in fast, but then it goes in very gradually, and it affects how the animation appears. So ease power 4 ease out, let's save it. So it kind of comes in faster, but then gradually goes slower and slower. All right. Next up, I think that's pretty good for that one. Let's create, after that comes in, let's take our stagger 1. Remember early on I said I wasn't going to apply the stagger 1 class anywhere. Well, we're going to add that now. So we're going to add it on our H1. So class equals stagger 1. And you'll see what I mean by stagger. We're going to apply it here too. And also stagger 1 is here. So just those 3 elements. The H1 element, which is right here, this element, and this element. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back down. TL.from. This is stagger 1, I believe. Looking at my reference monitor, make sure I get this right. And we're going to say initially they all are on opacity 0. So they're all hidden. And so now, well, we'll wait until I demonstrate some things. Y will be -50. Stagger 0.3. And then we're also going to use the same easing type. And also duration 2. Let's save that. Comes in. Now what a stagger means is the 0.3 means 0.3 seconds. It will create a stagger, like each of those 3 elements, anything that has the stagger 1 class, and there happens to be 3 because we applied it onto 3 elements, they will come in sequentially based on the distance defined here. So in 0.3 seconds, that's how they all come in, not at the same time, but a little bit after each other, just like that. Now, one thing I don't like is how long this takes. Like there's a big old delay, right? So we can create what's called an offset here after this closing bracket, and we can just say like negative equals 2, or 1.5 rather. These are seconds, by the way. So now watch. Now they come in quicker. It's not leaving us hanging. And now it creates just a nice animation here. All right, next up, our hero design. This is going to be fun. So let's go take our hero design. We're going to say TL from, and then we're going to say hero design. That's the class. Opacity. Let's get this on their own line. I'm screwing things up. All right, opacity is going to be 0. Y will be 50, so it's going to come up. Because remember, these are both negative 30 and negative 50. This is going to come from the bottom up this time. We're going to do ease, the same thing. Power 4 ease out. Duration this time will be 1. And we'll do an offset of just 1 second this time. No, 2 seconds this time. Well, look at that. Isn't that so fun? It is. It really is. All right. So now, remember I mentioned the square anim class? It was a bunch of them. Each of these squares, there's a couple circles, of course, but who cares about that? These all have the same class, square anim. We're going to create a sequence animation just for these to make them do something interesting. More so than just all coming up from the bottom. So what we're going to do is, instead of having this bound to a timeline, we're just going to say GSAP from square anim. And this is where that plugin, the scroll, oh wait, no, I was wrong. The scroll trigger plugin will come in later. We're going to say stagger 0.2, scale 0.1. So it's going to come from 0.1 or 10% of the current value. Duration will be 1. Ease will be back, ease out, config 1.7. And this is just from me messing with this over here, back. That's what this is right there. So now if we save this, watch what happens. Something broke, and this happens often. Uncaught error. If you go to your console, unexpected token. So I put a semicolon by accident. Oopsie. Now look at that. Isn't that cool? I think it looks pretty cool. All right, I like it. Next up, now we're going to deal with scroll-based animation. So we've decided all the animations done here. And now we're going to have scroll-based animations. Like when we come down, these will kind of float up or something like that. So to do that, we're going to say GSAP from transition to. Now remember, we use transition to throughout here. So if I copy Control F to search and find this, you see transition to is placed on a number of these items, like the container for these 3 elements. Also this element. All right, so it was placed in multiple areas basically. So for those, we're going to say scroll trigger. That's from the plugin. We're going to open that up into some options. Trigger is the same element, transition to. Start is going to be top, bottom. So what that means, that's very confusing. Transition to, so any element that has the transition to class applied to it. For instance, right here, notice it says transition to. When the top of transition to reaches the bottom of this scroll bar, right there would probably be like right where the top of this is, it's going to do something. It's going to animate somehow. All right, so if you look at the documentation for GSAP scroll trigger, it will tell you all, I mean, it's involved. There's a whole video for like 21 minutes long. It's very advanced. And it's very dynamic, and there's a lot of options. You can change this to other values, like when the bottom of, like this could be bottom, or it could be center. You can use actual numeric values. You can do a lot. So that's all I'm going to have there, though. Then outside of that, we can also specify what the things that need to be changed when this trigger stuff has been activated. So opacity 50, or no, 0. Duration 1.2, stagger, and we're going to stagger them by 0.3. So let's save this. So this activated immediately because this scroll trigger fired. So let's refresh up here like we normally would when a normal person's visiting the site. Look at that. So because we were nowhere near it, it didn't animate yet. Look, it still didn't animate yet. Now it animates in. And so did these two because it had that transition to element applied to it. So let's finally do these at the bottom. And this would be our final one. This time I'm not going to really bother. It's almost just exactly the same thing. It's just targeting transition 3. So transition 3, top center, Y50, opacity 0, duration 1.2, and 0.6 for the stagger here. So now let's close this out. I'm going to zoom up the browser just so we can see it a little bit better. So if I refresh, isn't that cool? And of course, all this works responsively as well. Let me go back to around 100%. And there we go. So that is the full UI UX design process, front-end development process of our Quick Portfolio site. Although it didn't feel quick, did it? So now we're going to get into the whole, getting this live on the web at GarySimon101.com.